The Shadow at Ravenwood Manor. Chapter 1: The Arrival. The road to Ravenwood Manor twisted through the ancient forest like a serpent, its edges swallowed by the encroaching darkness. James Caldwell gripped the wheel of his car, his fingers tight with unease. He had always dismissed his grandmother's stories about the manor, the whispered rumors of strange disappearances, the unseen presence lurking in its halls. But now, after inheriting the estate following his uncle's sudden death, he had no choice but to return. The manor loomed before him, a silhouette against the blood-red dusk. Ivy clawed at its walls, and the windows stared like vacant eyes. As James stepped out of the car, the wind carried a distant whisper, almost like a voice calling his name. Shrugging off the chill that ran down his spine, he pushed open the heavy wooden doors. The scent of dust and decay greeted him. The air inside was thick, suffocating, as if the house itself was watching, waiting. Then he heard it, a soft creak above him. Someone was in the house. Chapter 2: The Unseen Watcher. James' pulse quickened. He reached into his coat pocket, gripping the small flashlight he always carried. Flicking it on, he aimed the beam toward the grand staircase. Dust motes danced in the light, but there was nothing there. "Hello?" His voice echoed through the hollow halls. No response. He exhaled, forcing a chuckle. "You're letting the stories get to you," he muttered to himself. Still, as he explored the house, the sensation of being watched never faded. The feeling clung to him like a second skin. The portraits lining the walls seemed to follow him, their painted eyes glistening with something close to recognition. That night, as he settled into the master bedroom, exhaustion pulled him under. But his dreams were anything but peaceful. A shadow moved at the foot of his bed. And then it whispered his name. Chapter 3: The Whispering Darkness. James jolted awake, his breath ragged. His room was shrouded in darkness, but the whisper still echoed in his mind. Had he imagined it? He fumbled for the bedside lamp, but as his fingers brushed the switch, the bulb flickered, and then exploded with a sharp pop, plunging the room into complete blackness. The air grew heavy, pressing against his chest. From the farthest corner of the room, a faint rustling sound emerged, like fabric brushing against the wooden floor. His fingers tightened around the flashlight. The beam sliced through the darkness, revealing nothing. The room was empty. Still, the feeling remained. Something was watching him. Chapter 4: The Locked Room. The next morning, James shook off the night's terror, convincing himself it had been a dream. He spent the day exploring the manor, hoping familiarity would ease his unease. Most of the rooms were in disrepair, their furniture shrouded under dust-coated sheets. But at the end of the second-floor hallway, he found a door that wouldn't budge. It was locked. Strange. As far as he knew, there were no locked doors in Ravenwood. Curious, he searched the house for a key. After hours of rummaging through drawers and cabinets, he found an old iron key in his uncle's study. Its surface was worn, the edges rusted. James hesitated before the door, key in hand. A whisper of cold air curled from underneath, carrying the faint scent of damp earth. His heart pounded. Then he turned the key. Chapter 5: The Hidden Chamber. The door groaned open, revealing a dimly lit room. Unlike the rest of the house, this space was untouched by dust or decay. A massive oak desk sat in the center, its surface covered in yellowed papers. Shelves lined the walls, filled with strange artifacts, old books, rusted trinkets, even a glass jar containing something dark and unidentifiable. James stepped inside. The moment he did, the air shifted. The door slammed shut behind him. His breath caught. He turned, pulling at the handle. It wouldn't move. Then, from the shadows, a whisper emerged. "You shouldn't have come here." James froze. The voice was soft, almost mournful. It came from the farthest corner of the room. Chapter 6: the forgotten name. James swung his flashlight toward the corner. The beam wavered, illuminating a tall, dust-covered mirror. But the reflection, it wasn't his. A gaunt, hollow-eyed figure stared back at him. Dressed in old-fashioned clothes, its skin was pale as death, its lips moving soundlessly. James' breath hitched. He took a step back, his pulse hammering. Then the whisper came again. "You shouldn't have come here." The voice was not in the room. It was inside his head. James clamped his hands over his ears, but the voice pushed through, insistent. A name drifted into his mind, Edgar Ravensdale. He had never heard it before. And yet, something deep inside him recognized it. Then the mirror cracked. Chapter 7: The Crypt Beneath the House. James stumbled back as the glass shattered, revealing nothing. The figure was gone. But where the reflection had been, a phrase had been carved into the mirror's backing. "Find the grave." A sick dread curled in his stomach. He didn't want to know. He didn't want to go further. But something compelled him. Armed with an old oil lantern he had found in the study, James searched the manor's grounds. The overgrown garden stretched into the woods, and at its edge, half hidden by tangled vines, he found it, an old stone slab, nearly swallowed by time. A crypt. His hands trembled as he pushed against the heavy door. It resisted at first, then groaned open, exhaling a stale, cold breath from within. James hesitated. Then he stepped inside. Chapter 8: The Man in the Coffin. The darkness pressed around him. His lantern flickered. Rows of stone coffins lined the walls, their surfaces covered in centuries of dust. At the very end of the crypt, a single casket stood apart. Unlike the others, it was not old. The wood was polished, the metal latches unbroken. A name was engraved into the lid. Edgar Ravensdale. James' breath came short and fast. He knew this name. But how? Compelled by something beyond reason, he placed his hands on the lid. The wood was cold. He pressed harder. And the coffin creaked open. A body lay inside, dressed in fine but ancient clothing. But it wasn't the decay of a corpse that made James stagger back in horror. It was the face. It was his own.